Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. My name is Elena. I'm with Napa Book Mine. I am so excited to welcome you all to a virtual author event with Jaime Lowe, author of Breathing Fire, Female Inmate Firefighters on the Front Lines of California's Wildfires. And in conversation with Jaime, I am happy to welcome Lizzie Johnson, author of Paradise, One Town's Struggle to Survive an American Wildfire. Got a few more people. I'm going to let them in. Jaime is the author of Mental as well, a memoir about lithium and bipolar disorder, and Digging for Dirt, The Life and Death of ODB, a biography of Old Dirty Bastard, a founding member of the Wu-Tang Clan. She is a frequent contributor to the New York Times Magazine and other national and international publications. Jaime has contributed to This American Life and Radio Lab and has been featured on NBR and WNYC numerous times. Lizzie is a staff writer at the San Francisco Chronicle, where she has reported on 15 of the largest, deadliest, and most destructive blazes in modern California history and covered over 30 communities impacted by wildfires. Originally from Nebraska, she lived part-time in Paradise while reporting on this book, recently lived in the Bay Area, and now lives in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for joining us, Lizzie and Jaime. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and let you take it away.
Hi, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah. Hi, Jaime. Such a big fan. So happy to be here with you tonight.
Same. It's excellent to finally meet you after reading so much of what you've written on fires for the Chronicle. And I'm thrilled to read what you're going to write for the Post. One question I wanted to start out with, because I think it's something that I find interesting about both of our approaches and books, is that I remember in high school, my journalism teacher, who was this awesome, crazy woman, Montserrat Fontes, she didn't diminish the idea of feature writing, but she sort of talked about, like there were 4 sections of our newspaper, and it was like news, which was sort of hardcore, opinion, which was for the smarties, feature writing, which was a little bit puffy, and then sports, and which was whatever. And I think that one of the things, initially I was like, well, feature writing is not for me because I'm obviously not whatever. But then throughout my career, like the thing that I've come back to every single time I've wanted to write something or do something is to tell a story about people and to put people's stories first. And it feels like after having read your book, that you have a similar approach. Can you talk a little bit more about that, or about how you came to that professionally and like what that means to you?
Yeah. I also am so curious to know your answer to this. So I'm going to turn it around on you after I answer. But I mean, I think that with really hard news, like what we're seeing with these fires, it can be hard to draw meaning from it. And so I think at the heart of it is the people, and understanding the climate crisis and understanding this new reality that we're living in with these massive wildfires, right? Like it can feel very abstract when it's just, the biggest wildfire, and, then it's the most destructive wildfire. And then one summer you have 1 million acres burn. And it's like, what does that even mean? You sort of forget the way that people are impacted by it, the firefighters that are on the front lines, the people whose homes are burning down, right? Like when you hear like 14,000 homes, how do you even begin to process what that means, right? That's 14,000 families whose entire world has disappeared in a fire. And so I think that's the power of feature writing, of narrative writing, in helping people draw meaning and understand the landscape that we're living on. And I think it holds a really special place in journalism, right? Like, I'm so glad that that was a quarter of your high school newspaper, and it's not just puffy stuff. If it's done well, it can help us, I think, come closer together and have more compassion for people. But yeah, I've always loved your writing. I loved your book. Can you tell me about how you approach it?
I mean, very similar. I mean, I approach it by starting with the people. So I think that that's like where that the people sort of drive the narrative. The people have to kind of create the emotional connection to an issue. Otherwise, it's exactly what you're saying, where it's like this overwhelming amount of numbers and facts. And I think that facts and numbers obviously have to contextualize what the stories are, but they're so much more meaningful when you care about a person and you see them having to travel through these sort of data-driven disasters, or at least that's how it's presented. And I think sometimes a lot of the writing that I like to do could almost be, when I'm successful at it, which isn't always, it could almost be photography, in that you can see it, feel it, and that you have a gut reaction to it, that you see that there's the central part that is place and also character. And I think that that can often drive a story so much more effectively. And so, yeah, I really grateful to that journalism in high school too, public education in California all the way. So hooray. I think that, one of the other parts of your writing is how empathetic you are. And, I've heard you talk about this, and I also, because I have written about trauma and thought a lot about it, I'm curious about how you were able to kind of feel that and live with it, but, also express it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's hard, right? These fires, I think, you have to understand it before you can write about it and understand what it feels like and really feel people's experiences. But, it never gets easier going up to people whose houses have just burned down, or people who've been working for like 3 weeks in a row trying to put out a fire that will not go out. But, I think the power and the privilege is in being able to hear those stories and to help other people understand what's happening. But yeah, it's hard to hear that trauma over and over. I always say you want to believe that bad things don't happen to good people, but they do all the time. And particularly reporting in Butte County after the Camp Fire, there are a lot of people who will never be the same because of that fire, and the fire lives on in their minds and will for a really long time. And so I think as a journalist, you just have to approach it with sensitivity and compassion and understand that holding their story will help other people understand better as well, right? But yeah, it's hard. I mean, I'm sure you know that too, having written this book. How I just am so curious how you inmate firefighters are such a hard group to reach, to get access to, how you approached that and how you developed those relationships over so many years.
Yeah, very hard to access. I think that, so I had read this article about Shauna Lynn Jones in the LA Times, who had died fighting a fire. And, it was like a 500 word or less story. And
what was it about her that you got stuck on?
I think part of it was there was not a lot about her. It was like 2 sentences of the 500 words. And so I, having grown up in Southern California and having been born in Oakland and kind of feeling like I knew the state real well, I knew the hills and the mountains. I knew where that fire was, and I didn't know that the incarcerated fire camps existed. And it was like embarrassing for me that I didn't know. And then I was doubly curious about the fact that this woman who had died incarcerated fighting a fire, was basically described by her crime, and that she was from Lancaster. And that was pretty much all the information that was in the article. And I felt like I wanted to know more. Like I just wanted to know more about the program, and I wanted to know more about her. And so I called CDCR, the Corrections Department for California, like, I don't know, many times.
How many times is many times?
I would say, like, I probably, before it was actually scheduled, more than 20. And I got to have like kind of a rapport with the press guy who I think, you know, I don't know if you found this, but sometimes I think that as a female reporter who's reporting in sort of very like male dominated areas, you can kind of get overlooked as somebody who's actually going to write about the space. And so I think that maybe the PR guy was like, oh, we're talking about the weather in Davis. We're talking about the chancellor in Davis, like, you know, outside of Sacramento. And he maybe got distracted and was like, okay, you can go and visit the camps. And I was sort of shocked that they would let me in. I didn't expect that. And so I went to the training facility at CIW, which is I think it's the second biggest women's state prison in California. And then I went to all 3 female camps. One has since closed. And then when I was there, I interviewed everyone who was willing to be interviewed. And that was the beginning of establishing relationships. And because the program only takes women and men and actually juveniles who have a short sentence, they're released fairly quickly after they're trained in work season. So like the most somebody will work is probably 1 or 2 fire seasons. And then because it was over a long period of time after I wrote an article, and then a lot of the women that I had originally talked with were released. And so I could actually really talk with them because there weren't correctional officers there and there weren't people monitoring what they were saying that could add time to their sentences. And I could hear a little bit more about what the program was like from their perspective, and not just responses that felt always a little rehearsed. And not to say that there weren't still positive responses and still feelings of like, you know, that women who had gone through it felt like parts of it were transformative, but that there were elements that were just absolutely flawed. And that was what was expressed to me, both while I was there actually and in consequent interviews.
Mm-hmm. Were there any women that you had tried to track and just couldn't find afterwards? How easy was it to keep up with them?
For sure. No, there were a lot of women that were difficult to find again. And it wasn't like CDCR was going to help me and connect me to them. And so there was a lot of...
Got to talk about the weather some more.
Yeah. And at that point, the article had come out and he may be retired. It was very nice. But also, I mean, I think they felt like the article was, you know, fair. Like they didn't ever... I don't know how CDCR has felt. They haven't responded to the book either, so I'm not really sure. But like, has anyone from PG&E responded to you about your book or any? No. Yeah. I mean, they wouldn't, right? Because it would be like libelous or like engaging in something that they probably can't do or won't do. I don't know. I want to know how you gained the trust of the entire, like the town of Paradise. And there was actually, I'm going to read a little bit of your book. And all emphasis will be mine.
I think I've had someone read my book to me before. This is the first.
I'm just going to read a short piece of it because I think some of the emotional details of this are really extraordinary. Okay. Mary had attended high school with one of the administrators. She was comforted by the coincidence of running into him. but the blaze was everywhere, scorching the mountains and hillside with an unprecedented fury. The red and blue spin of police lights ricocheted past as officers drove into ditches and around fallen trees, rushing in response to reports about a cluster of people, including Ben Mullen, the cardiopulmonary supervisor trapped in the basement of Feather River Hospital. They were also trying to track down a woman who had gone into labor in the Fast Grip gas station parking lot. Mary pointed out the first responders to the children in a bid to distract them. "Look at those brave men coming to help us," she said. She recognized the face of a sheriff's deputy whose son had been in her class the previous year. He couldn't be harmed, she thought, because his wife and 2 children needed him. It was the kind of logic that made sense in moments like this. People with families couldn't die. The children screamed through the locked windows, "Thank you, Officer Brody, we love you." Their noses left smudges on the glass. And then you go on to sort of list some landmarks in Paradise, and there's so much intimacy in those details. And I just wondered, when you're writing that, how do you get inside of moments like that? How do you feel that and put it on paper?
I think a big piece of it is when you're reporting, just being very persistent and not going away. So after the campfire, there were so many people that left, and I knew that the only way I could understand Paradise would be to stay in a really committed way. So I actually moved there part-time, which my boyfriend at the time was not super thrilled about, but so like I would go on these evening walks and look at things. When people would tell me the streets that they were on, I would go walk down those streets and look and see what they looked like. Returning to people again and again, driving around with them, watching them, seeing how they interacted with the world, what their little mannerisms were, the way that they talked. I think that, I mean, it's sort of like what you were saying earlier when we were talking about feature writing, where so much of it is a feeling and really absorbing everything about the world around you in a way that feels very textured and tactile, so that when you're reading, you can be in that moment with those people and sort of understand what makes them tick and how they process things. So that's the way I approach it. I get really obsessive about my reporting, where I want to know everything. Yeah, I would say so.
When do you know to stop then?
I make myself stop. I think I could probably report forever, but at a certain point you just can't anymore, right? And I think part of that is, you start to develop the instincts of, okay, I have enough at this point to write, and realizing that you can't lose the forest for the trees, and that you have to just pull back and be like, no, I have enough, like I understand enough. But I always joke, I wish that I could like have a little USB stick and just download someone's entire brain, and then I would like have enough, right? But that's just too much.
I feel like that would be, you would lose many relationships over that.
Oh, I'm sure.
As somebody who also had a breakup during the writing of this, it's interesting the toll. I have no idea if you broke up with this, but the person.
Yep. Yes.
Yeah. Like the toll of choosing to write a book and sort of immersing yourself in other people's lives in a way that is, its own, I don't know how to describe it, but you have to share mental space with the subject. Mm-hmm. And I, because I didn't have to live with myself, don't know exactly what that does in terms of the ripple effects. Did you feel like writing the book was hard in that way?
Definitely. I mean, I think that with this kind of intensive immersive reporting, it's almost like you're putting your life on hold and you're going to live someone else's life for a while. And so you'll go and do that for like a week at a time. And then returning to your own life feels really weird, where you're like, oh, this doesn't fit quite naturally anymore. I don't know, what was your experience like?
I think that I probably went about it slightly differently. I didn't immerse myself so completely for those weeks, but I would go and spend a lot of time with the women that I was interviewing. I would basically call them and catch up with them regularly. Um, and then I still talk to people regularly who are in prison, and that's always this feeling of a reality check, because it's sort of like, you know, I'll be talking to Alicia, who's in the book, and she'll say like, well, I didn't have to get in a fight today, and I was able to have like, a pretty decent breakfast, which was like raw onions and a hard-boiled egg, and it was like a good morning. And she's really positive about it, and she's like, she feels like her appeal for her life sentence on a third strike is possibly going to go her way, but she doesn't know. So she's living with this uncertainty. She's separated from her parents and her daughter. And I think that sometimes I hang up the phone and I just, like you said earlier, like I feel grateful that I get reminded that there are so many different circumstances in this world and so many different ways people live, and that a lot of them are really hard and really hard and avoidable. And so I feel like the systems that are set in place are not ones that are appropriate.
Yeah. So I want to read part of your book back to you, because when I hit this line, I think I actually gasped, where I was like, oh, wow. So arguably, inmate crews are working the hardest, most dangerous job in California right now. They are a literal army fighting to save the state from a climate catastrophe. I mean, going into this, not having known that these inmate crews even existed, I'm so curious how you came to that conclusion. If there was anything that surprised you along the way. I mean, that has so much emotion to it, imagining all of these people who are so disenfranchised saving us from this like monstrous amorphous thing that is overtaking the world, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the fact that they're on the front lines of climate catastrophe is shocking, but then also that they are paid so little in a state that had a budget surplus, and for another, and this is actually an interesting part of CDCR, is that they've put forward year after year that the salaries should be increased, and the budget has never been allotted or allocated, losing my words. And so, they had on CDCR's website for a long time that these crews save the state $100 million a year, but it's not actually, economically, it's not actually saving the state. The state is actually robbing them of their bodily functions, their physical labor. They are, taking, like, a lot of the women who I spoke with couldn't do certain jobs after they were released because they were so injured being firefighters. And there are very few jobs available when you're re-entering. And so to have that even limited again is its own tragedy. I think that, the other conclusion I came to, which sort of ties in some of what you write about, is that, PG&E causes the majority of these fires, and these are white collar criminals. These guys get off, and they got off with manslaughter for 85 people, 85 counts of manslaughter, or 87.
It was 84 counts of manslaughter and 1 count of illegally starting a fire.
Right. Yeah. And which I'm sure you have like tattooed in the back of your mind.
I also love our books intersected on that part too. They're such, yeah. I'll read them together.
That's right. We'd be happy to read those sections. But I really think that there's something so unjust about this idea that these deregulated companies that are run for profit, that are not serving the state effectively and are causing deaths every year. And the people cleaning up that mess are like largely low income people of color who are incarcerated, and men and women and juveniles. And so those are people who are in prison and jails, and somehow the executives of PG&E will sell their houses for multi-millions of dollars, and they'll get bonuses and they'll still get paid. And there's a real it's like something beyond injustice. It is sort of a representation of our society and how income inequality sort of works its way into all of the sort of mechanisms of how things happen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think I just went off on many tangents.
Yeah, no, that was, I'm curious too, the women that you interviewed, how do they feel about that? Do they see it in such dark terms?
I think that they see it in very immediate terms, which is they, almost all of them would like to be paid more. And the reality of that is that incarcerated firefighting is one of the highest paid jobs in prison industries. And it's, when I started reporting, it was $2.56 a day and $1 an hour on the fire line. And then it's since been raised to $5 a day and $1 an hour on the fire line. And I think that, one of the calls to action is to have it be minimum wage or a higher pay or some type of comparable compensation. But I think, for me, and a lot of the women described how hard it was to be a firefighter and to be a prisoner, that you go out and because you've interviewed a bazillion firefighters, that it's one of the hardest mentally, emotionally, physically. It is one of the most taxing jobs. And especially right now, where it's fire after fire after fire. And I think one of my, the firefighters I talk to a lot said, you're just in the suck. And I heard that again and again from her. But I think that when you're doing that, and then you go back and you're a prisoner and you're treated like a prisoner, where you are called out for not having made your bed right, or you can have additional days if you somehow are misbehaving, or you're dealing with the trauma of being in prison and separated from your family. It is a program that doesn't make sense. Like, it is something that I really think CDCR needs to be separated from the program, even though the program has so many benefits. I think you can do it as a civilian conservation corps. I think you can do it in a lot of different ways. We have a question for you. Lizzie, can you talk about why these inmates can't work as firefighters once? Oh, me. Okay.
It's actually you, Jamie. It was like, it's good, but I don't feel like I'm the expert on this one.
So they can't work. So the one agency they can work for is for forestry. The federal firefighters can actually work with felonies on their record. But they can't work in municipal crews or in CAL FIRE, because you need to have an EMT or EMR license to actually be hired. And recently, Governor Newsom passed a bill or he didn't pass it. The people of California passed it. He signed it. And AB 2147, which it is something that allows for expedited expungement if you are a formerly incarcerated firefighter. There are some things about the bill that are not necessarily effective, I think. And part of that is that you still have to go before a judge once you're released. You have to get the judge to agree to the expedited expungement. A DA then has the option to appeal that. And so like after you've gone through this lengthy legal process, you then have to get hired by CAL FIRE or by a municipal crew. And these are agencies that maybe, Lizzie, you know more about this, but they're pretty discriminatory in a lot of ways. And like even the head of the union for CAL FIRE came out against this bill, and they really don't want to hire people who are formerly incarcerated firefighters. And there's nobody who's actually collecting data about how many people are, you know, benefiting from the bill. And so there's no way to know actually how effective it is. And you know, though I've heard anecdotally that there have been one or two people who have gotten expedited expungements, and that's fantastic. It is a step in the right direction, and it's recognizing this workforce, but it's just not enough. It's not nearly enough. And the state really needs firefighters. I mean, the forestry department has crews that are unfilled because they're paid $13.30 an hour. They're seasonal and they don't have health benefits. I mean, we're sending people into the worst air conditions and they don't have health benefits. Maybe you can speak more to that.
Yeah, no, you covered all of the points. It's really astounding to me that that's how the system is set up. You know, you do hear about some former inmate firefighters that can make it in those careers, but it's really, really hard. And, you know, they almost become tokenized, right? Where it's like, oh, well, so-and-so made it. And that's really all you hear about. And I think it creates this sense of false hope for a lot of inmate firefighters. It's like, oh, it'll be easy and we can figure it out. And then again, you're the expert on this, but the ones that I've talked to find it so crushing as they're trying to reacclimate to the real world and keep their head above water, find housing, have a job while pursuing this career that really doesn't want them. Can you tell me more about the women in your book and what that path has been like for them? And if there's any recent updates?
Sure.
We're at 30 minutes, just so you guys know.
Okay. Oh, time is flying.
I know. Good conversation. The recent update, so Whitney, who and I will say she's the person who had the most sort of support and ability to actually pause for a year, retake the exams, had access to computers, and she ended up applying to a bunch of hotshot crews, and she was a Tahoe hotshot, and then she was on an engine crew in Tahoe and is in her second year as a helitac. And you know, she basically will send me texts regularly and is just like, she still hasn't gotten her EMS or EMR or EMT. There's so many different acronyms for it. Anyway, she hasn't gotten she did the training and they rejected her. And so she still hasn't gotten the license. And so she basically can only be in forestry. And she feels like that's her only option, is to be in forestry. And that but she's so embedded in the fire community up there that, you know, her community are people who are choosing and dedicating themselves to being on hotshot crews, helitac crews, engine crews, and she sees what they go through, you know, mentally and physically every season, and that they're separated from their families, they're out there for long periods of time, and these, like you've experienced, like incredibly traumatic and very dramatic, you know, landscapes of catastrophe. One of the things I wanted to ask you, especially, you know, knowing that you reported on so many fires and had covered it so thoroughly and so well. I was wondering two things. One, how did that inform the totality of the narrative you wrote for your book, the work that you had done reporting about other fires? And then also, how did you, I mean, I can think of a lot of reasons why Paradise would be the story you would choose, but why did you choose it?
Yeah. So I had been covering fires for a while before the campfire hit. And, you know, that fire in Paradise just, I think, woke the state up and woke the country up in a lot of ways, right? Where, you know, all of the fires that came before it were really, really important, but that one really seemed like a turning point, right? That slap in the face of, oh, this is our future now. And I knew that we really needed to understand what had happened in Paradise in order to understand where we were headed. And I think too that disaster was just so big that it was sort of hard to wrap your head around what had happened and why it had happened, and, you know, what the town was going to do next. And so I would say, I don't know if I so much chose that fire for the book, is it just became really apparent that that was what I was thinking of all the time. And that's what I really wanted to understand. And it felt like all of the reporting that I had done up until that point was building towards this book, right? Where it all sort of tied together. But the campfire was the worst of them all. It's like, how do you even, 84 people, that's so much death and destruction, these towns that were just totally steamrolled. I think it was the fire that really made people start to pay attention, and that made me really want to write about it. So now I feel like I'm the one that's rambling. Did that answer your question?
No, you did. You answered it perfectly. No, I mean, I have like a really, really weird question, and I
Yeah.
don't know. I'm just curious if you ever came across this. I have a friend who went to Chico State and worked at the paper for a long time as a photographer, and she once told me that Paradise was actually named because there was a lot of gambling when it was originally settled, and that it was about pair of dice. Is that something that I could never verify that, because I was like, please somebody fact check this and make me believe it as real, because
Yeah.
it's amazing. Is that something you ever came across?
You know, I went to archives in Butte County and Sacramento and San Francisco, and I really wanted to figure that out because there are two competing theories. One is that it was the saloon pair of dice, and one that it was this settler named William Leonard who, you know, trekked up the mountain on a warm day and looked out at the pine shade and was like, oh, this is paradise. And, you know, whatever the true meaning is, it's totally lost to history because you can find both versions in the archives. So I wish I had a straight answer for you, but either of them could very well be true. I have
Even
no
if it's
idea.
just a small possibility, that makes me really happy.
Yes, there is a small possibility.
Okay, good. Good to know. Very good to know. I'm curious also about, and this is maybe looking forward a little bit, but I'm curious about what kinds of stories you want to be working on and reporting at the Post.
Yeah, I saw your question, Wayne. I'm so sorry I left the Chronicle earlier this summer and moved to DC. I'm at the Washington Post now. I'm on their local enterprise team, so narrative projects can sort of write about anything, and I'm still figuring it out what I want to write about. I think I need to take a little break from writing about climate disasters because I have enough climate anxiety for the rest of to like fuel me for the rest of my life. So
what do you do with that? Because I feel like, you know, I have a lot of family that lives in California, a lot of friends, and I worry about the state, and then I worry about the dysfunction of the utilities. And I think about like New Orleans and the fact that Entergy is like basically in the same boat where it's just these really dysfunctional monopolies that are profit driven. And I worry a lot about people who are here. And I don't think people are going to necessarily leave. And I don't think there are a lot of people who can't leave, like, period. And so I don't know what to do with my own anxiety about it. Like, it's clearly here. You know, I was driving up for family stuff on the 5, and in Bakersfield there was a fire in Lake Isabella, and there were, you know, I stopped there for the night, and there were CAL FIRE trucks and inmate trucks at the hotels, and, you know, tons of forestry buggies going up and down the 5, and the air was, you know, thick like cake. And it's hard not to notice, and then also to freak out.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
what do you do? what are your personal, I need some tips.
Yeah, I mean, write about it, I think. And I don't know, my big thing is that we can't just become used to this and pretend like this is normal now and stop caring. Like, we have to keep caring, because these are people's homes and communities and their lives. And so if at the very least we can keep talking about it and make sure that we're on the same page with the conversation that something has to change, then it's like all you can really do, right, is hold a mirror up to the problem and say, look, like, you can't look away, you have to pay attention. And I think you did that so beautifully in your book. And I think in life, that's all you can kind of do. You know, I don't know about you, but so often in these book interviews, I get asked for answers or what is the solution to solving this. And I don't know what the solution is, other than we just have to keep caring and thinking about holding these really powerful companies accountable, and thinking about where we're building and how we're building and where we're sending these men and women in to fight these fires, right? Talking about it, because that is the first step to coming up with solutions, is making sure that we're having the same conversation.
That's a great point, which leads me to the idea of, you know, it feels like only recently in the past, I want to say like 3 years, it didn't feel like a conversation before that, firefighters started talking about the mental toll of firefighting. And it's such a it's a very closed community, and I feel like I could ask the same question of you that you did of me regarding CDCR, which is, how do you go into those communities, but specifically firefighting communities, and talk with them about what they're actually feeling, experiencing, and seeing and doing? Like, what did you do to prepare for that, and how did you engage in those conversations? Because they're not easy to have.
Yeah, you know, the first fire I ever covered was the Butte Fire of 2015. And so I think part of it, again, is just showing up summer after summer after summer, where they start to recognize you. And, you know, it's making people feel seen and cared about. Like, you aren't just diving in to get a quote from them for a story, that you actually do genuinely want to know what their experience is like, and holding space for them, making sure they feel comfortable to share that. And I think too, it's just, you know, one firefighter will introduce you to another firefighter, then you sort of get to know a crew, and then the crew introduces you to another crew, and over time you just get to know the world. In addition to that, I think it's putting in the effort to show them that you are trying to learn and that you care. So I went through a professional firefighting academy, and that really helped too, because I was able to say, like, look, I kind of get it, because, you know, I went through this training and I did it too, and had black snot coming out of my nose, and like, that's crazy. Like, do you ever breathe normally again? And I think that's a way of earning trust too, right? When you just genuinely show up and are authentic with them and show them that you care.
Yeah. And I had a question in my head when you were just talking about disappeared.
Well, I have a question for you.
Okay.
How did you earn the trust of these women?
You know, I think that one of the things you said, and one of the things that I'm always surprised by, one, I'm surprised anyone ever talks to me about their stories. I feel like when they do, it is a total, it's a generosity that I'm just really grateful for, because I like to talk to people and I like to hear about who they are. And I think that one of the ways might be just that I wanted to talk to them as just whole people, and not just about their experience in prison or their experience as incarcerated firefighters or just even reentry. I wanted to know, you know, who their crushes were, and what it was like when they came out, and if they were smoking cigarettes now or Juul, or what it was like to re-enter and be in a halfway house versus your family's home, and what decisions were made and why, and who people are, as much as I can. Like, you can't fully, because it's still a journalist, approaching a subject, but I feel really, really close to everyone I wrote about. I feel like, objectivity is strained at a certain point, because after 5 years and after, births and of grandchildren, of children, of, witnessing life happening, like, you get to know people and you get to care about them, and vice versa. I have, like, I feel very close to everyone that I wrote about, and lucky that they talked to me. And so, yeah, I mean, I just saw Diana, Shauna's mom, in Lancaster a few days ago. And now I've known her 5 years. And so there's been a lot of ups and downs in her life and my life. And she always, asks about things that are happening for me too. And so it sort of it becomes like a two-way situation, even though I'm there and there's a clear sort of professional divide in some ways. But it's hard sometimes. It's hard to know what that relationship is.
Mhm.
Did you find that it was difficult sometimes, and or still is difficult?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you care about these people so much, right?
Yeah.
But you still have to do your job and serve the story. So, but yeah, sometimes I'm like, oh, I wish there was more I could do. But all you can do is write about it.
Yeah.
And that is a privilege and a gift in and of itself.
Yeah, it is. It's very lucky. Oh, hi, Gwyneth.
Shall we move to audience questions? Is this now a good time for that?
Yeah.
So Gwyneth is there, and then also Maria had asked something at the very beginning, referencing the fact that she can't get your book yet into prisons because it's hardcover.
Yeah.
So yes, paperback in the future. Usually it takes about a year for a book to come out in paperback after hardcover, but also was curious if incarcerated people wanted to write to you, Jaime, if there's an address that you have for that.
I'm just gonna put my address in the chat, and they can just write to me.
And then
everyone can come visit me too if you want.
And then I'll ask Gwyneth's question. Thank you. So there you go. Okay, so Gwyneth is asking, can you each speak to how the people you write about have responded to the books and reading your stories in your words?
Lizzie, you want to go first?
Yeah. I think it's still recent enough for some of them that it's still very traumatic. So a few people have been like, oh, I'm still reading it, but very slowly having to put it down. Others are super happy with it. There's a woman I wrote about named Rochelle, and she had just had a baby when the fire hit town, and she sent me the cutest little video of the baby blowing me kisses and saying, "Thank you, Lizzie." So that's always really amazing to see. Yeah, you spend so much time with these people that you're always like, oh, how are they going to take it? You know, sometimes it can be hard to hear the sound of your own voice, but it's been so good so far.
Yeah, that's always, I think, my biggest anxiety and fear about writing is having the people that I write about read it and the worry about what the response might be. And I try really hard to honor the story. And then also, like, I go through, I'll fact check everything with them to make sure it's accurate. But, you know, I try to stick with the general, like the New York Times principle is you don't send chunks of text to anyone. And so I don't do that. And so there's this big fear about, you know, what the response is going to be. And everyone, you know, there's a Facebook group of people who had been at Malibu Conservation Camp 13, which is where Shauna Jones was. And there's kind of this long, like, thread about the book and how much people have valued it and really felt connected to it. And a couple people have said that it was too, like, really hard to read because it was so close to the experience. And that is obviously not my intention to, like, cause more trauma to what, I mean, these are women who saw their friend die and they were in prison. But that it felt real, like their response was the one that was they were the ones I really wanted to hear from, and they seemed to appreciate what was written and the attention to their stories. And so I was really glad about that. And then there are some details from being in prison and jail that are kind of just horrific. And I've heard that was fairly accurate. And since I've never been in prison or jail, I felt like kind of triangulating information from interviews and various different lawsuits and lawyers who had been inside with clients. I felt satisfied that people felt like it was authentic. But I mean, you must have, I'm curious, Lizzie, about how, so there's so much detail in the scenes that you're writing. Like, how did you triangulate those specific moments that you wrote about?
Mm-hmm. I mean, just gathering so many photos and videos from everyone that I possibly could, going and driving the places and seeing what it looked like, interviewing as many people that were there as possible. And, you know, every person saw it slightly differently and noticed different details. So like you said, triangulating between all of them to tell the story. And then of course there was radio traffic that I could listen to, and I went through and listened to every single 911 call, and, you know, spending a lot of time walking around town, listening to conversations at the local coffee shop or the grocery store, and then digging through Facebook. There are all of these groups for campfire survivors, and people would talk about their experiences. So a lot of evenings I would also sit down and like scroll through there and be like, okay, what are people remembering today? What are they going through? What are they recalling? And so just like amassing a ton of detail that way.
It's kind of amazing. Hate Facebook, but it was actually really useful in connecting with a lot of people.
Yeah.
Horrible Mark Zuckerberg.
I know, because, you know, the truth is always a blend of so many people's perspective, right?
Yeah, but then it provides this opportunity to get in contact with whoever is available through, like, it's a good sort, like, tool of many. Like, it sounds like one of many tools that you use.
Yeah.
So I think, Maria, I was
actually, sorry, Meg had a question, so I was going to invite her to ask that.
Hi.
Thank you both for your fantastic books. I have a question about media coverage of fires. So I actually moonlit as like a fire reporter for the LA Times back in 2017, and that felt sort of like a turning point to me because there was the Thomas Fire and there was the big fire in Yosemite, and then that was like the Napa Fire round one here. But I was talking to a friend recently, and she was saying that she's felt like climate coverage has been mostly insufficient because major media outlets are for the most part based in New York, and that's not where we're feeling the effects of climate change. Certainly not wildfires, but also not massive flooding or tornadoes, things like that. And yeah, I was wondering if either or both of you could speak to how you've seen climate coverage change over the course of your reporting these books, or whether you think it's changed at all.
Well, if I can share a personal anecdote, like a week after I moved to the East Coast, I'm in DC now. I walked out of my house with my dog and smelled smoke. It was like, this cannot be the wildfire smoke from California, and it was. And I think, I went to the park and everyone was talking about it. I think that finally people on the East Coast, particularly those big newspapers and media companies, are understanding that this is not just a West Coast problem, that it's something that it is going to affect all of us, even if we live thousands of miles away. But I think I at least only started seeing that change this summer. And I think it could still be done better, but I think we're at least on the right trajectory with that, and caring and covering about these disasters, not as discrete events, but as this ongoing thing that is part of a larger issue, that climate change is, coming for all of us, whether it's flooding or hurricanes or tornadoes or wildfires.
Yeah, I agree with Lizzie. When I was on the East Coast last time, there was a smoke day then. And then in LA last fall, there was a big smoke day from fires that were up north. It's clearly seeping into every aspect of our world. And, I'm very curious actually about how, a million acres of trees lost is going to affect the weather in general. Like, I think nobody really knows. There are so many variables at play from year to year, from season to season, and it's hard to predict what it's going to be. And it's hard not to get into that tunneling, catastrophic anxiety. In terms of the East Coast covering climate change, I think that I sometimes feel like East Coast publications don't cover west of the Mississippi as well as they could or should, because it's easy to not understand a lot of the dynamics here. That said, I write for the New York Times, so I can't totally shit all over them because I cover California for the magazine, and I feel lucky to have gotten to do that, and they take my pitches to do it. So, but I do think that there's a lack of understanding of some of the dynamics, both politically, in terms of, how things, the dysfunction of the state sometimes is just kind of misunderstood in the history of the dysfunction and how far back it actually goes. I think that in terms of climate reporting, I think it's happening a lot more now, but then I worry that there's not enough personal climate reporting. I think that there's sort of the drop in one personal story, and then it goes to a lot of data, facts, and figures. And there's a certain point where you zone out and you're sort of well, okay, I know this is terrible, but I still need to get coffee and my paper cup, and I still need to live my life. I need my plastic bags. I need to keep doing what I do. And it's hard to integrate the reality of what's happening with the day-to-day reality of life when you're not actually forced to. And I think that some people are being forced to right now and some people aren't.
Thank you both. I want to tack on to that. I had mentioned this book earlier to Jaime before we got started, but Rising by Elizabeth Rush is a really fantastic book about rising sea level. She does include San Jose, then there's also Louisiana and New York where Sandy came through and a couple other places. And it's a really, really good, more personalized nonfiction look at climate change. And I'm dropping that into the chat if anyone's interested. And then Maria wanted to know whether either of you are planning to go to Los Angeles for an in-person signing anytime soon.
Maria, you missed me. I was at Chevalier's a couple weeks ago. I will not be doing an in-person in the foreseeable future, but the LA Times is doing the book club with the Breathing Fire. So if you want to read along, I'll be on Zoom talking about it at the end of September through them.
No plans in LA right now, but you never know.
Come out, we'll do a joint event.
So there's nothing else in the chat. If anybody, we are at 8:05, but if anyone had a last question really quick, feel free to unmute yourself. I'll wait for a couple more seconds. Nobody is doing that. Okay. Anything you two ladies would like to end on this evening?
Thank you so much for hosting this. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it. And thank you, Lizzie, for writing your book and for doing all the work that you do. And I can't wait to read all of your future articles at the Post.
Right back at you.
Well, thank you so much, Jaime and Lizzie. Again, both of their books are available at our bookstores. We do ship within the continental US. I dropped the link in there. You can visit napabookmind.com. We also we're doing about one virtual event a week. On Saturday, we are welcoming Adele, what's her last name? Nozadar. She's from the UK, so she's got a 10 a.m. event with us on Saturday for the Tree Forager, 40 extraordinary trees and what to do with them, which might be of interest to some of you. If you're interested in that, hop onto our website again. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. We so appreciate you. We so appreciate Jaime and Lizzie taking the time as well. And I wish everyone a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Stay safe. Bye.